Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche organization with your daily video update for January 31st, 2024. I think it's fair to say that today we're reaching a branching point in history, a potential moment of truth, and the establishment of new commitment to accountability when it comes to protection of human rights and a policy of condemning genocide. There will be a hearing today at the UN Security Council on a motion from Algeria to have the provisional rulings from the International Court for Justice enforced against the policies being conducted by Israel in Gaza. I think it's worth listening to the words of Bethlehem's evangelical Lutheran pastor, Reverend Munther Isaac, who pointed out that until now, Israel has been allowed to go without taking account, without a commitment to accountability for its actions. And he said the ICJ ruling, the International Court of Justice ruling, could be a turning point. Here's what he said. I think the ICJ could be a momentous point in our history because it showed what the divide is. The ICJ deliberations and how countries respond to it clearly shows where people stand today and where countries stand today. Gaza is indeed right now the moral compass of the world, and where people stand regarding the genocide that is happening in Gaza right now is important. You are either justifying the genocide or really standing with humanity and solidarity with the oppressed. To me, this is the most important moral and ethical element of the ICJ in that it divided our world. Now remember, this is the minister of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Bethlehem in the occupied West Bank. Now he then commented on the words of Biden, Blinken, and other Western leaders about their attempt to counter what Netanyahu's doing, their alleged attempt. What he said is, quote, for months now, we've heard that America has put some red lines to Israel as to what it can do and what it cannot do. And all these red lines have been crossed. Anything America says about the war comes to us as empty words. Until we see it, we will not believe it. The U.S. failure to act has been the most important element that empowered Israel and enabled Israel to commit such war crimes, because no one is holding them accountable. You can say whatever you want in press conferences, but it's what facts on the ground are that matters to us. The more Western countries continue to support Israel in this war, the more people die, unquote. Now, an example of this was the settlers' rally that took place in Jerusalem on Sunday, which included members of the Netanyahu cabinet as a pep rally cheering the creation of new settlements in Gaza. This goes directly against the provisions of the ICJ ruling against displacement. Now, a U.S. National Security Council spokesman on this showed the typical crocodile tears coming from the Biden administration. He said, quote, the U.S. is troubled, unquote, by the events, as it indicates support for forced relocation. And the spokesperson called the language, quote, incendiary and irresponsible, unquote. But then the same spokesperson for the National Security Council of the United States punted, quote, we take the Prime Minister at his word when he says Israel does not intend to reoccupy Gaza, unquote. Well, do you take him at his word when he says that there will be no Palestinian state? When he says that they will continue the war, and which in reality is leading to an emptying of Gaza, is displacing close to 2 million people? Well, that's the U.S. Administration, the Biden administration. Now, the French Foreign Ministry was a little more forceful. They demand that the Netanyahu government clearly denounce this, that is, denounce the meeting that took place in Jerusalem on Sunday. And they said the ICJ called on Israel to, quote, prevent and punish this kind of rhetoric, unquote. Well, what will the U.S. and France do at the UN Security Council today on the Algerian motion calling for acting on the provisional ruling coming from the International Court of Justice. Will they stand with humanity as a whole and put a stop to the Israeli attack? That doesn't mean a support for Hamas. It means a commitment to resolving the problem by moving to a higher peace movement. And we, of course, at the Schiller Institute have outlined very clearly what that would require: a policy of economic development for mutual benefit so that a Palestinian state would have the basis of not only securing independence for the Palestinian people, but a possibility for prosperity and a better future. Now, to give you a sense of how panicked the Western establishment is, I want to read you some quotes from Dr. Renard Mansour, who's a senior fellow at Chatham House in its Middle Eastern policy. Dr. Mansour published an article, and here's what he wrote. Quote, "As the International Court of Justice recognizes its prima facie jurisdiction to investigate Israel for carrying out genocide in Gaza, also on trial is the so-called rules-based international order." Where have you heard that before? That's what we've been saying from the outset. Mansour continues, quote, "The scale of death and destruction in Gaza is increasingly viewed as an indictment of a system facing perhaps its most daunting and most stubborn challenge: global perceptions of hypocrisy," unquote. Well, this is how the world is looking at the United States and the West, not just in Gaza, but in the whole of Southwest Asia, in Ukraine, in the attacks on China, in the Pacific. The whole rules-based international order is nothing but a military strategic plan to defend the predatory looting of the so-called world sole superpower. And what Mansour is saying is that this is no longer a secret. And he talks about then what's at stake in the hearings that are going on with the ICJ. He says, "If this international order publicly fails once again by proving incapable of agreeing an end to the unprecedented bloodshed in Gaza, it will further undermine the world's faith in the institutions that were built to serve it, and possibly contribute to its complete unraveling. Western leaders should think very hard about this historic moment and what might come next," unquote. That's from Chatham House, the City of London's think tank, which brought to fruition the geopolitical doctrine drafted at the end of the 19th century through the post-World War I period, the two world wars, that geopolitical doctrine, which is once again driving the world toward war. Well, the founding institution, one of the founding institutions supporting it, is now saying that order is teetering on the edge of existence. Now, it's unexpected given that the source, this is the City of London's think tank, but it shows we're approaching a branch point in current world history. Join us to make sure that the right road is taken and that we can get off the path to destruction, which is the path of the unipolar order and the defense of the sole superpower. Thanks for joining me. I would urge you to watch my interview today with Helga Zepp-LaRouche. It will be at the schillerinstitute.com. I'll have a link to it in the description section at the bottom. So I would urge you to join us and get your friends to watch also. We do have a record of being the one force in the world that's been consistent in understanding what the unipolar order means, how it's collapsing, and what the alternative system would be.